Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing my pile of possibilities for the fourth and final quarter of Historathon 2023. I can't believe it's the final quarter of the year already, and this lasts from the years 1820 until the current day. And I should also mention this is my very first time filming a video on my new computer, and the lighting looks so much better, unless this is just coincidentally the best time of day for filming. And this is what I did on a previous video about some library books. I'm also already in process of reading it, a big coffee table book, No Day Shall Erase You, the story of 9/11 as told at the National September 11th Memorial Museum. And I did recently do a video review of the book 102 minutes, so go check that out if you guys are interested. And this just basically has a lot of, photos of, the event itself and the, historical artifacts kept at the museum. There's also a bunch of, like different essays about, like how they chose to like structure the museum and like how they decided what to include and what not to include, and like debates over like sensitive and controversial content and just like really like, interesting stuff like that. And I mentioned back home in my hometown of Albany, New York, the New York State Museum has a permanent exhibit on New York City history, and they have a wing within that wing about like the World Trade Center, including like an actual like whole fire engine that like came to the rescue in a piece of one of the towers, and just all sorts of like memorabilia and stuff like that. I'm sorry if I'm blabbing. I'm just like taking up space until I find like pictures worth showing on the camera. But obviously I would recommend this if you guys are interested in modern history. Particularly, I admit fully, I know this sounds like horrible or like too like ridiculous to believe, I deliberately avoided as much news about it as possible when it happened when I was 21, a senior in at UMass Amherst. So basically I just genuinely didn't know a lot of this stuff until very recently. I had reasons of my own for wanting to avoid the news. I have like a very like emotionally detached like reaction to traumatic events like that. So I believe I was just like repressing secondary trauma, but obviously that's a whole topic for a whole other video. And I'm going to be pulling the books which I got out of the library yesterday from the two library bags. As I let's see, this is Cerberus bunny. I have a lot of plushy dreadfuls, and each stuffed rabbit, almost all of them are rabbits, they come with like a matching tote bag, and this is so cool. It comes with like the three-headed bunny and the city of Dees on it. And let's see which book is going to come out first. Oh, this is the a Civil War book. I absolutely love the U.S. Civil War. Mary Chestnut's Civil War. It's a big chunker of a book, and I believe it's like composed mostly of letters, not letters and diary entries and basically things like that. I guess her husband was away at the war. I'm trying to find the synopsis, but I guess it basically is just like a bunch of like diary entries and letters. And this is really, really cool if you're interested in epistolary books, either fiction, or obviously this is nonfiction, because sometimes that's just like a lot more interesting and personal and relevant, just like reading someone reporting like secondhand 100 plus 50 whatever years later about an event or a war, or like a particular thing in a family's history. But when you're actually reading it from the people who lived through it, they're like personal diary entries and letters they wrote. That's just like a whole other level of history. One of the many reasons why I love history. And there's only another book in here. This is from about World War II. This is a new book. Soldiers Don't Go Mad. I'm sorry about the glare. A story of brotherhood, poetry, and mental illness during the First World War by Charles Glass. And there was my library card. I put that in there. A 24-year-old British junior officer reported to Scotland's Craiglock War Hospital in the early summer of 1917, stuttering as he spoke and shaking uncontrollably. Battle scars and terrifying experiences had given rise to Second Lieutenant Wilfred Owen's malady, shell shock. Oh, he wrote that, poem like pretty much everyone knows. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, like sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. And obviously the irony of the lines is it wasn't, sweet and fitting to be like, mutilated and murdered in this like course of the war. Like going off to war is not a grand, glorious adventure, just like showing your jingoism. But obviously that's a whole other topic. Relentless machine gun fire, high explosive artillery shells, flamethrowers, loss of friends, and a wretched life underground had caused the mental collapse of more than 10% of the British officer corps in nearly as high a proportion of enlisted men during the first 4 months of the Great War that erupted in 1914. Owen, trying to make sense of the terror he witnessed in France, turned to the recently published poems of a fellow officer, Siegfried Sassoon. Himself an aspiring poet, Owen identified with Sassoon's daring and frank depictions of the soldier's plight. Then, to his surprise, the great poet himself was admitted as a Craig Lockhart patient. Sassoon, however, displayed none of the usual symptoms of shell shock: no tremors, no paralysis, no headaches, no depression. The Army had declared that the highly decorated first lieutenant was insane when he lodged a public protest condemning the war. You're like, what else is new? Oh, if you're against war, oh, you must be insane because only lunatics and traitors and treasonous people dare to oppose any kind of war. You're like, I'm a pacifist. Owen and Sassoon differed in age, class, education, and interests, but they shared the common experience of being outsiders. Soldiers removed from combat, gay men in an era of homophobia, and officers rejecting a war that was annihilating an entire generation of young men. Both men loved poetry and the beauty of the English language. As the friendship evolved over their months as patients at Craig Lockhart, they encouraged each other in their writing, as well as in their treatment. Therapy under the leading psychiatrists of the time, Drs. William H. R. Rivers and Arthur Brock, allowed Owen, Sassoon, and fellow patients to express themselves freely. Over the 28 months of its existence, Craig Lockhart incubated the war's most significant developments in both modern poetry and military psychiatry. A feast of storytelling and scholarship, Soldiers Don't Go Mad tells, for the first time, how soldiers and doctors struggled to reverse the debilitating effects of industrial warfare on the human psyche, moving from the battlefields of France and Belgium to Craig Lockhart's psychiatric couches, to Britain's literary salons, and to the cynical halls of power. Charles Glass charts the experiences of Owen and Sassoon and their fellow soldier poets alongside the greater literary response to World War I, as he investigates the roots of what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder in the light of the rich and productive relationship between Owen and Sassoon. Glass stresses the doctor's dilemma of healing men only to send them back to the conditions that broke them. Yet out of madness and healing came some of the greatest war poems of all time. And this is the full text of the poem Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear, at every jolt, the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. And these are the library books in the second bag. This represents Epilepsy Rabbit. He's the one in the middle behind me. I got him in honor of Dante because many scholars believe Dante might have had epilepsy or a very similar condition, and I am planning a future video and blog post about just that topic. And this might be a little bit before the 1820 cutoff. I had mistakenly assumed it was 1800, but I guess I'll just, have fun reading it, or at least leafing through some of it anyway. The Hemmingses of Monticello, an American Family National Book Award winner by Annette Gordon Reed. And obviously, who doesn't know about, the Hemmingses at Monticello? Thomas Jefferson was, taking advantage of his slave, Sally Hemings, and had bunch of kids by her, and this wasn't, obviously not consensual. Even if it was like she thought it was, he started, taking advantage of her when she was a teenager, and he was a grown-ass man in his 30s. That's just really creepy. That's like grooming. Sorry, not sorry. And on the back, this epic work tells the story of the Hemmingses, whose close blood ties to our third president had been systematically expunged from American history until very recently. Now, historian and legal scholar Annette Gordon Reed traces the Hemmings family from its origins in Virginia in the 1700s to the family's dispersal after Jefferson's death in 1826. So I guess it does like go a little bit past the beginning date. And so this is just going to be a really, really interesting book to look through, and let's see what's coming up next. Oh, one of my probably my absolute favorite first lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. Who doesn't admire her? She was just absolutely such an incredible like feminist hero and just like a general role model for everyone, regardless of being male or female. Eleanor and Hick, the love affair that shaped a first lady, by Susan Quinn. In 1933, as her husband assumed the presidency, Eleanor Roosevelt embarked on the claustrophobic, duty-bound existence of the First Lady with dread. By that time, she had put her deep disappointment in her marriage behind her and developed an independent life, now threatened by the public role she would be forced to play. A lifeline came to her in the form of a feisty campaign reporter for the Associated Press, Lorena Hickok. Over the next 30 years, until Eleanor's death, the two women carried on an extraordinary relationship. They were, at different points, lovers, confidants, professional advisors, and caring friends. They couldn't have been more different. Eleanor had been raised in one of the nation's most powerful political families, and was introduced to society as a debutante before marrying her distant cousin Franklin. Hick, as she was known, had grown up poor in rural South Dakota and worked as a servant girl after escaping an abusive home, eventually becoming one of the most respected reporters at the AP. Her admiration drew the buttoned-up Eleanor out of her shell, and the two fell in love. Eleanor confided in Hick about her marital unhappiness. Hick traded her career in journalism for work that brought her closer to the love of her life. For the next 13 years, Hick had her own room at the White House, next to the First Lady's. These fiercely compassionate women inspired each other to right the wrongs of the turbulent era in which they lived. During the Depression, Hick reported from the nation's poorest areas for the WPA, and Eleanor used these reports to lobby her husband for New Deal programs. Hick encouraged Eleanor to turn their frequent letters into her popular and long-lasting syndicated column, My Day, and to befriend the female journalists who became her champions. When Eleanor's tenure as First Lady ended with FDR's death in April of 1945, Hick urged her to continue to use her popularity for important causes. Advice Eleanor took by leading the UN's post-war Human Rights Commission. At every turn, the bond between these two women was grounded in their determination to better their troubled world. Deeply researched and told with great warmth, Eleanor and Hick is a vivid portrait of love and a revealing look at how an unlikely romance influenced some of the most consequential years in American history. Now, I have been aware, there's a controversy. Some people definitely believe, obviously, as this author does, I'm going to find out why she believes that Eleanor Roosevelt was a lesbian, and others feel like, oh, you're just putting a modern interpretation on it. You're reading in stuff that wasn't there. Yes, she did admit she hated sex. She thought it was a horrible, grotesque duty, and was angry and horrified when her cousin Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, was trying to talk to her about sex or just general topics, and she, how dare you talk to me about this? This is absolutely gross and immodest and shameful, and it should only be done, think of England in the dark. And she also Eleanor told her own daughter, it's not really a good thing, just endure it for your husband's sake, but don't try to seek it out too much. So some people feel maybe that meant she was asexual or a lesbian, and others just feel that was particularly in the era, so-called nice girls don't do that, or they're not supposed to think about her sex, particularly if you're imbued with this shameful attitude from a young age, oh, what's not nice we don't show, don't you dare ask me about that. That's just something married people have to do, and a woman is sinful if she gets any pleasure from that, or does it in anything other than the so-called socially prescribed, socially acceptable way. But obviously, I guess this book is really going to explore that. So I guess I'll find out. Maybe I'll have a different opinion about that later. Although obviously, again, many women in the past, they expressed friendship to one another in letters that in ways that seem to the modern era oh, this is definitely a lesbian relationship. And sometimes even men would say those things to one another, even if all the other evidence suggested they were heterosexual. For example, in the old days, they were oh, darling, 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 darling. I all those old films, everyone calls one another darling every 30 seconds, and you can see this in vintage letters too, oh, darling, I kiss you 1,000,000 times, and I wanted to hug and cuddle you. And that's genuinely how, well, maybe some people are right when they say this maybe wasn't like just deep friendship, but obviously, like in the Victorian mindset, maybe some people genuinely did express themselves that way to their friends without thinking anything sexual. It's just like, oh, when you're close friends, you call them darling all the time and like constantly like kissing and cuddling and stuff. But anyway, like let's just get on to the final book in this bag. This is also like I guess a companion piece to the No Day Shall Erase You book, A Place of Remembrance, official book of the National September 11th Memorial. Forward by Michael R. Bloomberg, 108th Mayor of the City, New York, Chair of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. And this is the updated edition of the book, and it I guess like has like all new pictures and stuff, and maybe like some new essays, or like not so. Well, there are some essays, but just guess like maybe not so many talking about, you know, like, oh, these were the decisions we made for like what to include and what not to include, and how to design the museum, and about like the Virgil quote, like should it be included, should it, you know, not be included. And I again, like I encourage you guys to check out my recent video about the book 102 minutes. Let me see, I just passed a page I had wanted to show. I guess I'll like find it again while I'm, you know, leafing through it. This image is also in the other book about the Statue of Liberty. I'm sorry for the angle, but it's just like really like I guess artwork a lot of people had created and artifacts they salvaged. This is the sphere, which was like found at Ground Zero, which New York City people never called Ground Zero. I just found out recently they called it the pile. They felt the term Ground Zero was, you know, kind of disrespectful because it implied a bomb had gone off, and it wasn't a bomb. It was just, you know, like a terrorist attack, and just like opinions from like survivors and people who were related to people who were killed, and just like all sorts of really like moving stuff in this book. And this is definitely part of my ongoing education about the possibly the, you know, the biggest historical event of my lifetime, which, you know, I mean, obviously you can't feel like really shame for things that were like genuinely on your mind, or that was like the way you processed emotions, or just how you like reacted in the heat of the moment. But I just really wish I hadn't avoided as much news as possible at the time, because I just felt like, can we get back to like regular life now and like report on other things? It wasn't trying to downplay, but again, I just have like a very like emotional like detachment reaction to news. I'm not the kind of person who like, you know, cries when tragic things like happen. It's just, you know, like I obviously emotional detachment is a thing for its own like subject, but you know, that's genuinely how some people like, you know, react to news. It doesn't mean that they're not like, you know, saddened by it or like shocked or numb. It's just like some of us just like don't display like emotions as freely and openly. It's just, you know, like a way of dealing with trauma as a self-defense mechanism. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I particularly love seeing comments from you guys, and because today the 15th of September is Erev, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and it is traditional to ask for forgiveness for people we have wronged this time of year. I would like to genuinely apologize from the bottom of my heart if I may have done anything that, you know, inadvertently, unknowingly offended or insulted any of you guys. I know in particular I have a very like blunt, working class, like straight shooting from the hip way of speaking, and like people who aren't familiar with that, you know, way of talking might interpret that as like rude, but you know, it's just like how you talk if you're socialized in the working class community. Or if I have, you know, said anything else that, you know, like might have like offended or like hurt some people, that definitely has never been my intention at all. I'm not that kind of person. And so thank you guys again very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.